So today what we're going to do is we are going to show you in about the next 20 minutes to half hour, we're going to walk through how we can take our now exported SketchUp model like this and now turn it into a final rendering like this. So what we'll do is we'll now go through how we can break down the Photoshop file into getting your SketchUp model export into a final concept rendering. So here at Studio JDK, what we really specialize is in unbuilt architecture and concept design. We can call it storytelling, digital storytelling. And what we typically get from clients is what you're looking at right now on the screen, which would be a series of elevations. This one in particular is for a mixed-use community in South America. And we'll get a lot of elevations, and the architecture isn't really figured out yet. It's still in the works, but obviously there's a big need for marketing imagery for fundraising, city approval, what have you. And this is really where we come in. So we'll take these elevations, and then what we'll do is we'll bring them into SketchUp, and we'll start developing full 3D SketchUp models based on the elevations that we receive. So this is, again, a mixed-use project in South America. There's a lot of detail here, but it's still very conceptual in nature. A lot of the details of the architecture haven't been figured out yet, and the request was for a lot of activity and a sense of place here. We really wanted to capture the essence of what this project was, put a lot of activity in the plaza, show a lot of outdoor dining. So we modeled everything based on the elevations, sent that off to the client, and got approval on some views that we were going to send out, that we were going to render. And let's get down here. So we'll work with picking views. For instance, here's one, and here's one. And I'm not going to get into too much about how we're exporting from SketchUp in this video. That was described in a video we filmed previously, but what I do want to show today is how to handle a larger project and a larger workflow using SketchUp, V-Ray, and Photoshop. So once we pick the views that have been approved by the client, we'll then export out line work from SketchUp and a color select layer from SketchUp. And I can go into that in more detail here once we're in the file. But then what we'll do is we'll prep this file for V-Ray. We use V-Ray a lot for adding a lot of texture and reflectivity and life to these models. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take you then into a Photoshop file. So what we're looking at right now is the exported 2D line work from SketchUp in hidden line mode. We typically set our profiles to 1, and we'll export that at about 3,000 pixels in the smallest dimension. And what I mean by that is if the image is in more of a panoramic style shot, we'll have the height of the image be about 3,000 pixels tall. What I'd like to do today is walk you through how we're going to start building up this Photoshop file. There's going to be a lot of layers here. I'm sure you're going to have some questions. What I really want to get across to everyone is it's really about you as the artist and finding your style. How I do a drawing is definitely not going to be how you may do a drawing, but maybe you can glean some tips from what we're doing here today, and maybe you'll find some things that are really helpful for you. So we have our line work here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you, so we have line work in Photoshop, and then here is our base V-Ray render. Let me hide the lines here and zoom out a little bit. And so we use V-Ray on almost every rendering that comes out of the studio, and the reason we do that is we can get a lot of really great movement, richness, and texture from V-Ray that would take a long time in Photoshop. And for instance, the herringbone brick pavers here in this particular drawing have a lot of great reflection and bump on them. And the reflections of the car add a lot of life and movement to the car. We can get some really nice general lighting. We all know here in the studio that the V-Ray is not the final product. We like to work very heavily in Photoshop to add all the life and the drama to the drawings. So we'll then import the V-Ray render, and what we'll do then is we'll overlay the lines on top of the V-Ray render. I'll turn that off just so you can see it again. So we have the V-Ray render, we have SketchUp lines. That line layer is set to multiply, and the default setting at 100% in the layer is a little heavy feeling to me personally. Again, it's all about your personal taste. So I usually scale the SketchUp lines back quite a bit. And it's great. What's great about that is SketchUp can add a little bit of detail back in and V-Ray, some of the lines, some of the mullions. And in a way, it kind of acts as an ambient occlusion layer. And what I mean by that is where two surfaces meet, you usually get a little bit of a darker shadow. And SketchUp line work can kind of act as this default ambient occlusion layer. Not perfect, but that's definitely the point. We don't want this to be a perfect drawing. We want this to be a loose, emotive drawing of the architecture and the place. So after I bring in the SketchUp lines in the V-Ray, I personally like using a paper texture, which I'll turn on here. And that paper texture to me just helps deconstruct the rendering, makes it a little softer, makes it feel a little bit more like art than a computer-generated image. So I'll turn those on and off. You can see here's the V-Ray and lines. And we're adding a paper texture here. I'm not going to go into how I construct that paper texture. You can see here from the video I have it at a soft light setting. The important thing here is that I use it to help soften the drawing, and I urge you to go out and find your own way of creating that softness in a drawing. The next thing I'm going to do is one of the layers that we export out of SketchUp as well is a scale people layer. And if I turn that on, you can see that what we've done is we've placed 2D silhouette people throughout the entire model in SketchUp. And we've actually exported that as a transparent PNG. And that really helps in getting your entourage into perspective. It's an easier task to do it in a pedestrian perspective rendering. Essentially what you do is you establish your eye line, which is this blue line you're seeing here, and then you know that as you go into the distance, everyone's eyes still need to kind of hit that eye line, but they get smaller as they recede into the distance. If that's too complicated, scale people from SketchUp are definitely a great way to help you establish scale for people within your drawing. So it's a transparent PNG. We never have that layer on, we just have it for quick reference. So I'm going to turn that back off. The other thing we export from SketchUp is our color select layer. And I went over this in a previous video, but essentially what we're doing is we're grabbing all the materials in SketchUp, turning them into a really nice 1980s style drawing here with all our nice neon. And the reason we do that is when we're in Photoshop working on quick selections and a lot of masking, if we're able to use our magic wand tool and go into, let's say, the blue color here, we can select blue, and if I go into select similar, I now have all the certain blue color that I need to put an adjustment on. That works great for windows, roads, reflections, anything you need to use it for. Let's turn that off. Now, what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned earlier in another video, it's important to make the software and make the image work for you. Too often we've seen that people are a slave to whatever is pumped out of V-Ray or Shader Light or Maxwell, whatever you're using. And the thought is well, the machine has given that to me and now I just need to use it. And I'm here to tell you that's absolutely not true. I want you to explore your creativity and your artistry with making this drawing really work for you. So if we look at the base V-Ray image here on the screen, I actually start by doing a lot of different adjustment layers. So if I turn these on, you can see just how different that makes the drawing feel right away. I wanted this drawing to be very light and energetic and warm, and we had a very good start in V-Ray, but I wanted to push it more in Photoshop. What I'll do is I'll create a folder basically called adjustments, and I'll go in and I'll do all sorts of adjustment layers in Photoshop. So I can turn these on one by one just so you can see how I'm doing. So I wanted to brighten the sky, add a little bit of warmth to the drawing with color balance, Brighten the levels. Hue and saturation on some certain areas. So at this stage, there's not really a lot of painting going on, but there is a lot of adjusting going on to the base color. That's really important to help establish the overall lighting scheme and feel of the drawing before you really dive into the details. So after I've gone through and adjusted the base V-Ray, the base render file, to a point that I'm happy with, now we can start adding some of the fun and life into this drawing. Let's just hide our lines so you can see where we're at in the Photoshop file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and start painting in a bit of a sky color. So all I've done with that is I've gone to my color select layer, used the magic wand to select the sky for me. I can even do a select similar. Right? And so the great thing about using select similar is you can see that if I just selected the sky, I'm actually missing a little bit here in between the balusters here, the balustrade. And if I select similar, it's now going to select all the color on our color select layer here in SketchUp, from the SketchUp export. So now I have a pretty tight sky selection here. So now I can come in and I can paint, choose a color out of my paint palette here on the far left. You can pick a purple color. And then with the gradient tool, what I can do is come in and just give it a nice subtle wash of color. And so that's all I did here for that layer, was picked a nice night color that worked well with the oranges and yellows that were already established in the base render. And then I did about a 45-degree gradient. And you can have it a very low opacity if you want to help build up that color. You can do a strong gradient across to just do it once. Totally up to you. I then used a photographic image of a sky that I found on Google and placed that in over top of the sky color in my stack here. And I set that mode to overlay. If it was at normal, it'd be a little bit different sky, but what I wanted to do was show a little bit of that color wash coming through on the base layer. So if I go to overlay, you can see that I'm now establishing a light direction and adding a lot more color, warmth, and richness to the sky here. The other thing you can do here with your photographic textures is you can scale the opacity back to something that works for you. So I'll just show you here what that does to the sky. Now at this point, it's totally up to you on how you want to proceed with this drawing. What I like to do for night scenes is get in there and start adding storefronts. So using the color select method, let's turn that back on, I'm able to select the pink, to select similar, and that's going to give me all my windows in the drawing. So they're all going to be highlighted here, as you can see. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn on what I have done. So you can see I've used a lot of photographic texture here for the storefronts. We now have mannequins in the windows. We now have a lot of movement and richness in the background windows here. And this is all using photographs and then masking them into the storefront windows. You can turn these off and turn them on one by one so you can see here. You can see how they start building into the drawing here. There you go. So now immediately we have some points of interest to look at within the drawing, and it gives the SketchUp architecture that we've constructed a little more depth. One thing that I didn't mention earlier was we typically will only model out false facades, and what I mean by that is we're only going to model out the elevations that we see within the view. So these buildings you're looking at right now aren't full 3D models. They're just basically elevations of the architecture. And by adding a little bit of depth in Photoshop in the storefronts, it makes them feel much more complete. Next thing we can do is just add a little bit more touches of color here. So this one, in this particular layer, it's very, very subtle. And I'm not even going to go into it here at this point. We can start adding in some trees after the storefronts. So if I turn on my tree layer, you can see that all my vegetation now has been done with photographic textures. Haven't done anything with V-Ray. There's no trees that have been rendered into the scene. These are all done in Photoshop. And I'll tell you why I like doing that. Oftentimes we get requests to take out or move one tree. If these were what they call baked into the actual render, we'd have to take out or move the tree and then re-render the entire scene. By using photographs of trees, we're able to take one tree and essentially move that, scale it, make it more transparent so you can see the architecture. We just have a lot of flexibility in Photoshop. And that's really important because we get a lot of change requests in drawings that are this early in the process. So I'll turn all these off really quick and add them in one by one again. So I've got a ground cover layer here that you're looking at normal, on it set to normal. It's really just a little bit of grass and leaves here. Not too much to it, but again, it's adding that layer of detail, that layer of believability that these are planters that have a lot of vegetation in them. Then there's some foreground planters here, again, all photographic that have just been kind of cut into the scene. And you'll find that as you work in Google or with Google Images or wherever you're finding your images, what's going to happen is you're going to find photographic textures that aren't lit the same way as your rendering. So you may need to come in and do a little post-processing with those images to make them fit into your scene. For instance, if I remember, this planting group here was probably way too bright for the scene, so I came in and desaturated it, darkened it, maybe added a little bit of red to make it fit in with the scene. Again, don't be a slave to what the computer is giving you. Really make it work for you. So here's some palms that I've put in. Got some more trees that start to really fill out the scene. And trees are the same as the ground cover. These probably weren't lit this way. I went into Photoshop and made them feel like they were being lit from the ground, so they were uplit to give it a little bit more dramatic flair. And I did that by darkening the layer, by desaturating it, and then we can come in and either with a dodge and burn tool or an overlay paint, we can add a little bit of highlights to the bottom of that tree to make them feel like they're being lit or uplit. So there are the trees. And then all I've done here with, so in my layering I have something called trees M, and all M stands for is multiply because I've set that layer to multiply. And what I've done is I've just added a little bit of shadowing from some of the trees and ground cover to make it fit in with the scene a little bit better. If I don't have that, it feels a little bit cut in. But if I do add that back in, it feels more ingrained within the rendering. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a fountain into the plaza. And then I knew that the client wanted a center water feature here. So we're going to turn that on. And you can see now that it's a bright, vibrant fountain, what it does is it really pulls your eye into the drawing and into the space. And so the primary focus of this drawing was really the plaza and how it relates to the architecture. And by adding more activity, which we'll do in a minute here, and this really bright fountain, your eye now travels straight to that area of highest contrast, and you're really starting to look down into the plaza, which is exactly what we wanted to do. So the next thing I'm going to open up here, which might be a little overwhelming, is I'm going to open up the people layer. So let's turn on people. So you can see in this particular drawing, there is a ton of entourage, and entourage is very, very important in every single drawing you do. In this particular drawing, we did need South American people. So we took some care in finding the right types of people to put into this drawing so that they felt like they belonged in this place. And we've just added a lot of activity, and similar to the trees, none of these people were lit the exact same way. So you need to take some time and some care to go in and make sure that the people feel like they're being lit by the actual lights in your rendering and the ambient light that's coming from the established light in V-Ray. So we have a lot of activity, people dining, a lot of people in the background, a lot of outdoor dining, a lot of activity. We've got our fountain, adding some movement with the guitar players over here. So lots and lots of activity with people, and people are just about the best way you can add a lot of life and energy to your rendering. So I can go in and show you all the layers that we have here. A lot of masking, And what I mean by that is, these people, for instance, these two happy shoppers here were, it's a full image of two people. And what I did is I've now masked them out behind the car so that they appear to be behind the car. The other important thing is I have this M layer here. And if you recall from earlier, M stands for multiply for me. It's all about what works for you. And the multiply essentially is my shadows. So I have these softer shadows, softer evening shadows underneath all the entourage. And if I didn't do that, they still feel relatively cut and pasted in. But by adding shadows to all these people, they now are grounded into your rendering. So there's the people. So the next step that I'm going to do now that I have trees and people in place is I'm going to add a little bit more energy and life to the scene. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to turn on this layer here. This is called overlay layer. There's no secret to it. Essentially what I've done is I've set a new layer to overlay, and then using a very soft paintbrush, I've gone in and painted in a bunch of glow to areas that I wanted to either call more attention to, give more life to, add a little bit more energy to. And so let me toggle that on and off for you. You can see here that I use the overlay layer a lot on storefronts to emulate light spillage from the storefronts. You can even use it as a quick reflection in the ground plane here, so you can see that there's some glow coming down from this really bright fountain. And that verticality helps draw your eye again up into the fountain. So that's an important layer because here the drawing to me is still feeling relatively desaturated, a little too dark, not enough energy. And by adding the overlay layer to that drawing, I'm really starting to now add in the warmth and the energy and add in all my light tones here to the drawing. So the next layer, the next folder I'll turn on is going to get even more exciting. So I'm now going to add in all my lighting. And so that really makes a big difference in this scene. Let me toggle that on and off for you. So as you can see, I have got a ton, I've even given it a funny name here, Holy Flares Batman. I have a ton of light flares. Look at this. There might be 100 or more light flares in this Photoshop file. Each one is going to be fully movable, which to me is great. Again, because we get so many requests to change things in the Photoshop file. So if I'm just going to select one of these little flares to show you that it's just this little individual flare here that I can move around. And there's no secret to these either. This is just a flare you can grab off of the internet and set it to screen, and that'll, just like multiply gets rid of all the white, screen mode in Photoshop gets rid of all the black. So if I change that to normal, you can see that that is a flare on a black surface. Now I'm changing it to screen. It's important not to overdo all the flares because then you're just going to get distracting. But what it does is it really adds a lot of life, a lot of energy, and a lot of movement to the drawing. So now the eye has a ton of places to look, and there are little hits of light on everything that really add richness to areas that I haven't paid much attention to yet. So I'll toggle that on. Let's toggle on and off the overlay and flare layers. So you can see again, I'm starting dark and then working towards light. So we'll turn on our flare and our overlay. So now there's a ton of light in this scene, a lot of energy. At this stage, I'm getting pretty happy with where the drawing is headed, and now it just becomes more of a personal taste of what you want to continue to add into your drawing. To me, I have a history of more traditional rendering and painting. That's my background. And so what I like to do for most of the renderings that come out of the studio is just add a little bit more of what I like to call the color wash, or essentially just a little bit more of almost like a watercolor type wash of nicer colors. So here I'm going to toggle that on and off again. And this is all about what works for you. It really doesn't matter what layer setting you have on that layer. If you want normal, multiply, soft light, hard light, overlay, just find what works for you in this particular drawing. I can't say two drawings are ever the same, But you can see that what I'm doing is I'm toggling on and off, is that there's a lot of nice blues and purples that start coming into the bottom of the drawing. And all that's doing is it's helping to push the eye into the center of the drawing. And two, it's adding just a little bit more richness and warmth to the bottom of the drawing here. So at this stage, I felt like there was a lot of foreground, and now that I add that kind of soft painterly style to the bottom, it's pushing your eye up to the middle of the plaza, adding that color, and that's starting to feel pretty good to me. The client wanted a performer in this scene. There's a stage in the plaza, and that was a request after the fact, and so we came in and we added a dancer. There she is, little dancer, and turn that on and off. We have some additional textures that I'm just throwing into the road, and that's really, really subtle. But again, it's just, at this stage of the drawing, for me, it was more about personal taste and just about adding in a little bit more detail into areas I felt were just a touch dead. And really, the very last thing that I'll typically do to a drawing is just add a few little highlights. And so these are really, really subtle things. They might be painted in with a white paintbrush. Usually always done in white. In this case, looks like what I did here was just add some icons to the umbrellas. So I'll take some time and add in a few last things that I feel like I need to do to a drawing like this. And once I get to a stage where I'm happy with it, which is where we're at right now, and I have hundreds of layers, as you scroll down through here, all the layers. There's a lot of layers here. What I'll do is I'll now save a flattened copy of the drawing. And the reason I'm going to do that is because now I want to make some more global adjustments to the rendering, and I don't need all these layers anymore. I'm still going to save this file as a copy. You definitely don't want to get rid of your layered Photoshop file. But now as I'm getting into more global changes, it's okay for me to flatten all this, make a much smaller file size, and start working on a flattened file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my flattened file here and show you. So here's our base render. And what I'm going to do is you can see that I felt like I've missed a spot a little bit here on this person, so I've added a little bit of shadow under her. There was some tweaking. You know, a great strategy when you're doing a rendering is to take a break and don't look at your rendering for 15 minutes, half an hour, a day, 2 days. And when you come back to it, you'll be amazed at how much your eyes have readjusted, and you'll be able to pick up on little things that you missed the first time around. So in this case, you know, I've missed shadows and some color correction. We're going to put some signs in here, and these are all done just with either the font tool or images, but there was the need for more signage. So we turn that on. I'm going to add a few more highlights. So this is what I was talking about earlier. These are just scribbles with a paintbrush, but they're so far in the background, you're never going to tell. And so I just painted in some white scribbles, and they read as signage from this far away. I felt like the tower in the center of the drawing, even though it was meant to be conceptual, I felt like that was a little bit, it could have used a little bit more depth. And so I just added a little bit of texture into that glass to just mimic from this distance a little bit of some of the furniture art on the walls. And that made it feel just a little bit more, let's just call it deep. So you're going to look into the building here. One technique is you can blow out your lighting just a little bit more. So I'm just adding essentially what they call bloom in rendering. There's a little bit of bloom going around my highest highlights or my brightest highlights. The next thing I'm going to do here globally is just add in a little bit more of that painted color. So again, I felt like this drawing, although it was looking pretty good to me at this stage, I felt like it could use just a little bit more color and warmth. You can see here, this SL layer, just for me, stands for soft light. So on a soft light layer, I've gone in and just painted in a little bit more of that ambient color to really tie the drawing together. So here it is without it. Still looks really good, but to me it feels pretty dead. Now what I'm doing is I'm going into soft light, painting in a little bit more of those oranges and purples. You know, and at this stage, you can really call this rendering done. And to me, these renderings still feel very emotive, very rich, very romantic, if you want to call it that. And they feel solid. It feels like this really could be a place. And that's about as far as we want to take these drawings at this stage of the project. The architecture is still underdeveloped, the plaza is underdeveloped, but it's all part of the design process. There just wasn't time to develop any of that yet. So this is a marketing image that really captures the spirit of the place to get people excited. So this is a project we completed for LRK Architects, and we had a number of scenes that we needed to do here for them. And so using the same methodology, we were able to construct a number of views for this project. So this is looking at the exact same plaza, just at a different time of day and a different vantage point. So all the steps that we went through just now still apply to a drawing like this. Your lighting's going to be a little bit different, so the people, the trees, a lot of the entourage doesn't need to be as dark and desaturated. You can use a lot more of the natural daylighting that you'll find in a traditional photo for the entourage. But again, this was about capturing a lot of energy, a lot of outdoor dining opportunities, some street vendors, the fountain in the center of the plaza there, the retail that wraps around the plaza. Those were all really important to the client and so needed to be shown in different lighting conditions. Here's another scene, same plaza, same conditions, just another night scene here. So to wrap up, what I'd like to do is just encourage you as a concept designer or concept artist to really explore your own style. Find what works for you, find what works for the client, and just keep developing that and knowing that ultimately the goal here is to create a mood, right? We're not focused on photorealism right now at all. We're trying to create spirit and emotion and mood in these environments and something to help sell the project. So appreciate you watching, and we'll talk to you next time.